All right, this I feel like is where we should point at the sign. The Charles Leclerc sign. That's like, it's testing, we don't know anything. So even though I don't know if any of these tech changes or different bodywork on the car is going to be any good, I can at least point out to everyone listening and watching on YouTube the interesting new pieces that we're seeing on certain cars that are worth paying attention to. It's going to be a couple races. It's going to be a little while. We're going to see the success of the team to see if any of these are good improvements or changes that teams have made. But since we are on year 3 of a regulation set, it's good to see teams still like making upgrades and changes and improvements and interesting things for us to zoom in on in photos and say, ooh, what did they do there? So,
the magic of Formula 1.
If you're only listening on audio, definitely head over to YouTube, because we'll probably do some like side by sides and we'll throw out visuals of everything we're talking about. Because guess what? I'm not an engineer or an aerodynamicist or anyone, so you're going to hear a lot of thingy bits connected to the thingy bits here. So I'm going to do the best I can with my explanations here. So the first thing you're going to hear a ton about is the side pod ducts. So these are the big holes when you're looking at the car straight on that are cooling ducts. And they're going to be all different shapes and sizes. And the reason you're going to hear a lot about them this year is because the Red Bull went super, super thin. And the best way I could describe theirs is it looks like a mail slot and is like thin as possible. You can only fit an envelope in there. And then also next to it, they went really thin, but vertical. So they have like 2 separate ducts. So you're going to hear a lot about side pod ducts and how everyone made ducts that look like Red Bull's RB19. And then Red Bull went, we're going really extreme and making our envelope fitting tiny ones. The second thing you're going to hear a lot about is that one of the things that's actually differentiating a lot of the teams on the grid right now is the width and connection point of their nose. I also love that so many things in a car are just like human things, but like we all know when I say nose. So connection points, many teams on the grid are connecting their nose at the second winglet. And you'll see that there's like the first little winglet and then a little gap, and then the nose starts. And then the Red Bull last year, the RB19, connected at the second winglet. The Red Bull this year is connecting at the first winglet after most teams went away from that this year. So, you know, yay. Who knows? Who knows what any of this means, but it's stressful.
It's different.
Right. The next thing you're going to hear a lot about is one of the very few regulations changes made this year was that teams are now allowed to add another nose cooling slot higher up the nose. And this is because last year, like at the Qatar GP and the Singapore GP, like drivers were passing out and not getting enough airflow. And the solution to that is that teams can now add like another hole in the nose essentially to let air through for the drivers. Now, what do you think teams did? Of course, they're going to allow holes through the drivers, and then they're also going to make these look different to achieve some kind of aerodynamic need, or at least create the least amount of loss. And again, everything is how do we make the air do the funny, crazy things we want the air to do? And if you have a new tool... So basically the regulations used to say this needs to be flat, and now it doesn't. It says you're allowed to have a hole in this space, or you're allowed to do certain things in this box in the car, which means all these aerodynamicists have a new tool to play with. I will point out notably that Mercedes, for example, has like a long, wider one, and then you can compare that to Red Bull that has like 2 little notches on theirs.
It's a little like those Voldemort nosy.
Yeah, I could see that. It's kind of reptilian for sure. So you'll probably see a lot of changes in that because it's like a new area that lots of teams are seeing what other teams did and how that works. The last like note here before we get into like 3 more dramatic things worth talking about in the tech space is that a lot of the teams this offseason invested in going into changing their rear suspension. So Mercedes, Aston Martin, and Alpine all now have push rod rear suspensions, which matches the Red Bull. So a lot of people say that the genius of the Red Bull is in how their suspension works. And the part of that was this push rod rear suspension. Mercedes actually redesigned its entire gearbox, and Aston Martin is a Mercedes team. to be push rod. So Aston Martin, I don't know if they would have made this change, but they definitely had to if they wanted to use this upgraded gearbox. Notably, Williams, the other Mercedes team on the grid, decided they didn't want to spend budget on updating their rear suspension from a pull to a push. So they're going to be using last year's gearbox spec for Mercedes all season. So now we have 3 categories on the grid. We have the front pull push rear, and that is the 2 Red Bulls, the Sauber, and the McLaren teams. And then you have the front push, back push, so the double push, and that is the Mercedes, the Aston, and the Alpine. And then you have what I call the opposite of the Red Bull, which is the front push and the rear pull, and that is Williams, Ferrari, and Haas. And I think Ferrari, in discussing this, decided that it wasn't worth it to make this change for essentially what's the next 2 years before the regulations flipped out. So that's why they're like, we don't need to do that. That was a lot of push-pull words, but go over to YouTube, look at the graphic that I definitely put up on the screen if you wanna know more. All right, so then I think there are 3 tech topics that I want to throw your way, Nicole. The first one I'm calling is shoulders or no shoulders. So a big thing that a lot of people noticed from the Mercedes last year, Aston Martin had something, is what I call the shoulders. But essentially it's like right above the driver's head, they had these like big goalies where it literally looked like a haunch. Like someone was hunched up. And Mercedes' car this year has no shoulders. And guess what team came with really dramatic shoulders that look exactly like Mercedes of last year? Red Bull. So how does that make you feel?
That feels like Red Bull figured out something that everyone just wants. Red Bull constantly tries to do a thing or does, and it's like, oh, someone else did it. Well, we're going to do it the right way. It's just it's one of those moments where I see it's all the memes of Adrian Newey walking around I can fix him. And it's kind of sometimes, besides terrifying to just see the dominance, cool to see things work sometimes. Yeah, I don't know what weird magic that they're going to have all figured out there, but shoulders, they're going with it. They know something that Mercedes doesn't, and Parker is barking away here about, there he goes. He's so confused. He doesn't get it.
I feel all those same feelings, but then I also came to the realization that it probably is just not that big of part of the performance of the car. Is the reality. I don't think this means doom to Mercedes, and I also don't think it means Red Bull's just poking fun at them. I think it's
Brianna, looks different, but it's different. It looks so different. And Mercedes did have it, now they don't have it, and then Red Bull did it, now they do, and it's so different.
But it also it is so frustrating. It's oh, okay. The Red Bull basically took all the parts from all the other people's car last year that they liked, and they put it into the RB20 with, I'm sure, all the good juice of the RB19, and everyone's gonna have to watch their innovations actually work on this car, because the reality is most of the juice is in the parts of the suspension we can't see and the floor. I was watching a video that Sam Collins did, because he does great tech videos for the F1 YouTube channel and on F1 TV, and he thinks that what Red Bull figured out with the Mercedes design with the high shoulders from last year is they figured out a way to do it with their engine and their gearbox where they didn't need to move the driver so far forward to make it work. So something that Mercedes hated about their car last year is how far forward the driver had to sit, and that's because of all the stuff that needed to fit in the back. It seems like Red Bull is sitting in the same place in the car, but have this setup of the aerodynamic elements that Mercedes did. So if this does seem to really work out for Red Bull, he is making the assumption that that was what they were able to figure out that Mercedes might not be able to do with their power unit. And shout out to Sam Collins for explaining things in ways that make my brain understand them. I can take credit for none of the words that just came out of my mouth. Go check out his videos, please. All right, and the last 2 tech bits here are just, the first one is, everyone should pay attention to the fact that Ferrari has attached these little wings, is what I'm calling them, to the ends of their halos. So it looks like at the end of the halo, there's a little like half moon piece that's a very oversimplification that is coming out and then attaching to the chassis. And they're the only team on the grid with this little moon on it. It also seems like an interesting piece because a big part of this regulation is that you're not allowed to put a lot of little winglets in all the different places, unlike the regulation set before. So I think it's interesting that they found a winglet option. We'll see if it works, and we'll see how many teams quickly adopt that if it does work. I'm sure they're all running it right now. Is like all the engineers back at base are like, let's run that Ferrari winglet. What does it do? Does it work on our car?
What is that going to do for us? It definitely screams we looked through the regulations and this was a loophole where this can go here and it will do something.
Right. Can't tell you what it will do. Can't tell you if it's going to work. But I think with all of this, by the way, if other teams start adopting it and adding it to their cars, then we can make an assumption that it was a good find by a team. But all these cars work so intricately with each other that it also, like, if no other team adopts it, it could still be working great for Ferrari because of the way the Ferrari car is set up, but it's
everything
not going to work
else,
on any other. Like, it's
variables.
Yeah. So the last one here is also, we looked through the regulations and we found a thing. We do need to talk about the Mercedes front wing. So the way the regulations are written, this is in human terms, is that the front wing, all of your like wing elements need to be completely connected from the end plate to the nose. And this is because in regulations past, you would see all these front wings where you would just have all these things coming out of the end plate and then they would stop and they wouldn't make it all the way to the nose. And that was really great for your car, but it created a ton of dirty air for people following you, which hurts passing and following and all the things this regulation set was trying to improve upon the racing. So one of the areas, it was like, you cannot create any of these winglets unless they touch the nose on your front wing. And Mercedes said, okay, well, we're going to create our fourth little flappy thing. And we're going to take this tiny piece of carbon fiber and it's going to go from the end of the flappy thing and touch the nose. And so you'll see that if there's 4 flappy things and there's 3 flappy things and 1 little tiny string. And technically that achieves what the regulations say. And it's going to be interesting so the caveat to all of this is that in order for the FIA to deem this illegal, they need to be able to rewrite the regulations in a way that makes this illegal to close the loophole. That's why we would get a technical directive. So I do believe that it is not something the FIA wants teams to be able to do, but can they rewrite the regulation to make it so that it is now illegal? So that's kind of probably what's going on behind the scenes right now. If the FIA is not able to rewrite the regulation in a way that makes this illegal, I am sure we're going to see every single team on the grid upgrading their front wings as quickly as possible to bring this to the racetrack in the coming month or so. But we'll have to wait and see. Do you think Mercedes is going to get away with it? And is it actually going to help the car at all?
I'm going to answer this question backwards. If we start seeing it help the car, I do think we will see Mercedes be told they can't use it and vice versa. If it like, that's exactly what if we see it kind of maybe working, I don't, and also to the point, it could be anything on the car that's making the car do whatever the car does. But just for the way that things Mercedes goes, I think they will be a statement. I would be shocked if a statement were to come out allowing it. I just kind of am anticipating, nope, sorry, actually, this is not going to work and will have to be changed by XYZ date and other teams can't do that. Although it would be very interesting to suddenly, start seeing the scramble to update.
I'm going to point to the sign real quick. It's just testing. We don't know anything. Okay. So many people are putting Mercedes in like the middle of the pack or like well clear below at Ferrari, McLaren, and Aston and like based on testing performance and stuff. And again, sign, we don't know. Okay. I think if that's the case, everyone's gonna be like, yeah, keep your front wing. Like, you're so slow, whatever. But
yeah, I was gonna say, like, why? Right now, I don't think there would be anyone, rushing to be making that exact adaptation to think that, Oh, it's gonna make us drive just like the W15. Yeah,
But
no
I'll
one's
point
really
out
saying that right now.
that
But it's just testing. Look at the sign.
Yeah. Yeah, the team that had the most innovative things last year on their car that so many people ended up adopting were Alpine. You know, so it's like, it's so interesting that like all these teams could bring something random and innovative, and it might only help their car a little bit or a lot, but then you stick it on the Red Bull and it's really helping the Red Bull. So it's like all of these things are packages that work together, and we don't really know or understand what's going on. But at least I gave you, you know, I hopefully gave you 7 interesting things to help zoom in on the car about, and 7 things you can attribute or blame your favorite team's performance to.
Thank you for watching this highlight from an episode of Gridwalk. Subscribe for weekly Formula One content. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Like the video to make Nicole and Brianna extra happy. And click the link to listen to the full episode. We will be back to walk the Formula One grid every Thursday. See you then.